Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
Good to have you here. Thank you for taking the time and being willing to be a part of this project.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking.
Yeah, absolutely. We could start with just introducing ourselves, and if you'd like, you can share your preferred pronoun and pronouns, um, and also what you do for the college would be great.
Yeah, sure. I'm Lisa Peterson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of gender violence prevention and education on campus. So essentially, what that means is I'm, responsible for thinking through what are strategies that my office can do and that we can mobilize and empower folks across campus to do to prevent sexual violence, dating violence, and stalking on campus. So offer different programming opportunities, think about like what are some compulsory programs that we can put together. And then I do a lot of kind of leadership training and capacity building within students too. So yeah, trying to think about how we can really shift culture on campus to be the most respectful, safe place that it can be.
Perfect. And thank you so much for all the work that you do.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
And I'm Roland Mendiola. I use he, him, his pronouns. I work as a clinical psychologist and serve as the interim director at Counseling and Wellness. And for anyone new listening to these interviews, the basic intention we have in holding these conversations is to, one, allow students and anyone else the opportunity to hear voices across the college that they might not hear in a more personal way, and then to specifically hear about hear conversations about the intersection of mental health, social stigma, personal identity, and culture, trying to explore those different issues and how they come together at a time like this in our lives. So thank you again for doing this. As I've mentioned to anyone who I've been able to speak with, really anything you have to share is great, whatever level of comfort, whatever level of detail, it always seems to work out perfectly. So I just encourage you to trust that. I'm so appreciative of you being here and excited to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So starting off, my first question is, did you grow up talking about mental, emotional health? And if so, how? And if not, how you made sense of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was not something that we talked about growing up. Like my I definitely saw my folks like experience emotion sometimes, and I remember it sometimes feeling like really scary sometimes, especially as like a young person.
Yeah.
To see like a parent crying like felt like something must be really terrible
Yeah.
because it wasn't something that they did often.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a lot of discussion about it. So it would be like experiencing the emotion and then usually like something to kind of like get back to not feeling like upset, like not feeling sad or not feeling angry,
Yeah.
and not really having like an open dialogue about it. Um, and I think, like in general, I think like my family kind of ascribes to the belief that I think can be, typical of lots of families of different backgrounds, that you sort of like keep going. So it's like you're going through a hard time, like it's better to like stay busy and, you know, like keep being productive and not kind of get, sort of like mired in the feelings that you're experiencing. So that's what was often like modeled for me and I think like encouraged for me to do that if I was feeling really sad or feeling lost, that like it wasn't that it was bad to feel those things, but that there wasn't a lot to be gained from sitting and feeling the feelings.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you should kind of keep yourself, busy. So like go to school, do your work, kind of keep going, and that will, like you won't have to then feel those feelings as much. And it's better to not feel feelings. Was I think the lesson that I was kind of given like implicitly and explicitly.
Yeah.
Um,
You'll move past them if you just keep doing other things, doing what.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so almost as though like it's like something like an like an intruder that you just don't let in your house.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
then like it won't
yeah,
stay if you like put up enough barriers.
yeah. Right,
Not going to gain entry.
right.
Which would, be lovely if that were the case. But
Yeah,
sadly, it's not.
yeah. They'll get the hint after a while. They just
Yeah, and it'll just
come
move
around anymore.
on. Exactly. Yeah.
I think it brings up a really excellent point, or at least just a common experience of, and again, something we don't talk about a lot. We could have like a whole conversation, I feel like, about it, but like how much, at least I think about how kids were raised typically in the past. Um, just not a lot of context for their emotions. Like
Mhm.
even if it's okay to feel things, maybe not, not a lot of like contextual information, or let alone like discussion about it to give it like meaning, or
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
yeah. And yeah, and then what happens with that? I guess maybe a lot of um, young people, at least I'm thinking again, maybe of our generation, having to sort of figure it out, maybe navigate it themselves.
Yeah, no, I think so. Well, and I think it was interesting with how my family approached it. I think is something I still find myself having to work through sometimes is like almost this acknowledgement that other people like need support with feelings that they're feeling. So like that's something that you should be like present for and check in with people like when you know they're going through a hard time. Like that's important to do. As like a good friend or a good family member.
Yeah,
Um, but then almost like on the flip side kind of expectation that but like strength is like not needing that yourself, which is kind of like a very interesting, I think, like hard dichotomy.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
like yeah,
yeah,
might have more to do with like individual personality or even some, I think sometimes that's where like gender socialization can come into play a little bit, where especially folks who are socialized as women, girls growing up, kind of like this value placed on like helping.
yeah, yeah. So there's like allowances for other people needing, having emotional needs, but we're okay, more or less. We're okay.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. I think that's pretty super common as well.
Yeah, yes, I think so too, unfortunately.
So I'm finding with these conversations, what I get especially interested in, intrigued by, is just more or less like people's mental health journey, almost like how they got to where they, where how they came from where they came from to where they are now. So I'm interested, yeah, what's your current relationship to these kinds of things, mental, emotional health, well-being, um, yeah, and how you make sense of where you came from to get here, including like some really, I think really important points you made about like how you make sense of those messages about keep going, stay busy, like um, don't get mired in the emotions.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so I think, for me, and I think I chose a helping profession. And so I think that for a while, like that played into that a lot. And so I think like I would be able to like say the things to other folks that like they needed to hear to like be present and process hard feelings that they had. And I think often felt like I should be able to like do that work on my own. And I think it wasn't until I found myself like, really kind of struggling because I think I was not, engaging in self-care and in my own mental health in a way that I should have been. That several different friends would share like, oh, like either to a specific point in time when I was struggling, like I reached out to a counselor and found it really helpful, or like I still currently see a counselor and find it to be really helpful. And even talking about some like logistics of how do you even do that? Because even as someone who, has been in this field for a long time,
Right.
and has like thought about people working through different barriers to get connected, like the actual logistics of how to like you yourself even go about like finding someone to talk to.
Mhm.
And so having a friend say like, oh, I called my EAP program through work, like employee assistance program. And then, got connected that way. And that was really effective for me. So like even being able to both like be normalized, like, oh, like these like strong women who like I respect and think so highly of, like find it really beneficial to talk to someone. And also like, here's the way that they were able to do that for themselves. Like really made it a lot easier, I think, for me to admit that probably would be helpful for me to try to, and has been something that I've found really beneficial and have, had now a really long-standing relationship with a counselor that I, work with on a regular basis. And am now like actually like walking the walk of things that I've said to people for, ages and ages of that it's like part of your regular like preventative health, right? Like we don't think anything of making dentist appointments and making doctor appointments and figuring out an exercise and nutrition plan and all these things to take care of our physical health, and that we don't prioritize our mental health in the same way. So like really just, like normalizing for myself, like the importance of that and really benefiting from it. And then trying the best that I can to normalize that for my family. And actually, there's been different times where like a family member will be like, realize they're really struggling, and I'll talk about the benefits that I've had in like, having regular counseling. And they actually have, gone to see someone once or twice. I think having a regular relationship is something that, is not quite where they are yet, and that's okay. But even just, watching them like be open to that has been really great. I'm glad that I was able to get that from other folks and, kind of pass it along to them too. So I think that's a big part. And then I think that I have, again, also started thinking about self-care in a different way than I had been before. And, something that we talk again a lot in like this field. And I can even remember, like over 10 years ago now, when I was starting to be, trained as a public educator and a rape crisis counselor, that a lot of the conversations we had about self-care, like were this kind of more like commodified self-care that I think often comes from a very specific place of class and sometimes race, and thinking about like, well, are you taking enough bubble baths and going on enough yoga retreats?
Right.
And that was something that I never really like resonated, and I never was successful in integrating into my life. And so
it's like pampering or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think now I really think about self-care and like prioritize in a different way of being, I think, still some of that like nurturing self stuff. It's like sometimes more bubble bath-esque.
Hey, yeah. We're not saying don't do the bubble bath.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. But then it's also kind of almost this like parenting yourself piece of kind of like I think in my 20s, I would almost like lean into, if I was having a hard time, just like letting myself have a hard time and not kind of forcing myself to do things that would probably make me feel better. So just, like not really thinking critically about what I was eating or how much I was moving or how much I was sleeping or to what extent I was cleaning my house, which was not very often.
This is all hitting home too closely, I think, right now, Lisa.
And so now like I do those things and like I don't want to wash the dishes, but I know that like having a clean kitchen, I will feel better. Yeah. And so like taking your vitamins and forcing yourself to eat a salad for lunch and get those veggies in and like that type of stuff that I think I often didn't prioritize for myself. That to me is all part of kind of that mental health piece and like really taking care of yourself.
Yeah, what you said a moment ago particularly resonates of just like when you come to the point of realizing how you're starting to integrate this yourself as a health practitioner and everything you've been telling people or everything you've been learning about, it's like, oh, this is what it means. And wow, like these are all the ways I actually don't take care of myself or aren't nice to myself particularly, or
Yeah.
and that's hard. I mean, that happens obviously maybe for you too, but that happens on the regular for me. Like,
Yes.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going through that again, you know, over and over.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there's definitely been conversations, I've had with my own therapist where she'll say something that I'm like, oh my God, I've said like literally word for word that to someone else.
Yeah.
But I think just a humble reminder that, like, I think when we're in our own head about things, like sometimes you do need that outside perspective to kind of ground you and remind you. And especially when we have some of these thought patterns that aren't always like so healthy, that can be helpful to have an outside reminder and give a little
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, I think it speaks to just how sort of tunnel visioned we get in our lives, and how we just miss perspective of all kinds of things. And in a way, that's often what I'll tell people. Like, I don't feel like counselors are necessarily like special kinds of people. They're just like they can sometimes like get perspective like anyone outside of you that you
Yeah.
just don't have because you're not looking at it, and yeah, and we have the same experience when we engage with people in our lives or our own therapists and all of that.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how you started touching on this, but how who you are and where you come from informs your relationship, specifically informs your relationship to your sense of health and well-being. And I'd love to particularly hear, and not just this, but when you talked a few times now about what it means to be a strong woman, like
Yeah.
what that means to you now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think in terms sort of like maybe like background and identity pieces, sometimes it's hard to tell like what's coming from identity and what's coming from just like peculiarities and like the folks that we
Yeah.
have in our life. But I think particularly for my family, kind of more like middle or lower middle class. I think there is a certain element sometimes, like especially to getting kind of more like professional like counseling or help, that there can be some cost and time barriers to
Mhm.
that,
Absolutely.
which I think that's part of the reason that I think for my family, like that hasn't always felt like an option. That if are like locked into an hourly schedule at work, and depending on like what benefits are and
Yeah.
things like that, like it can be a little harder, I think, to sometimes access those resources, or even know how to access
Yeah.
the resources.
Yeah.
And I think, too, is a kind of part of that. I grew up in southeastern Massachusetts, and I think there's also sort of that like kind of like puritanical like work ethic, like history, where you put your nose to the grindstone, and you work hard, and you don't have time for for things like
Yeah. Yeah.
sitting in your feelings all the time, I think.
So that fed into your family messages as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think where it's like, that's almost like a luxury to be able to do that.
Exactly. Luxury. Right.
Yeah, yeah. And even thinking back to like now, like doing this work, thinking about stories that I remember even hearing, like, like my grandparents tell, and like real trauma that they experienced. And just kind of this like, well, you need to keep going, and like things like that happen to people, and like it could have been worse. And so I think like all of that,
Mhm.
kind of like informing, which I think there's some, like class pieces to that.
Yeah.
Um, and some, I think too, I didn't talk about this before, but I think some like religious aspects too. So I grew up Protestant and Congregationalist specifically. And I think thinking about like a relationship to spirituality and the church, was one area where like it was okay to be getting support,
Mhm. Mhm.
to like talk about things that were going on. And so that was definitely like part sort of like of the fabric too, and something that, you know, I think that my family and I probably like benefited from in some aspect of like, there sort of was this acknowledgement that it's, you know, it's really okay to talk to a minister or something, if you're having a hard time. And so like still kind of creating that space for help seeking, but not as much of a comfort with, you know, sort of the more like clinical side of things, not feeling maybe as comfortable for folks. So yeah, so I definitely think that was part of it. And then I think that, you know, I think the gender piece, I think, comes into play with both. I think both of kind of like the helping and the caring, sort of like associated with like identifying as a woman, but like I've done a lot of thinking now too about for this really interesting place that we are, and kind of thinking about feminism and what it means, you know, specifically to be a strong woman, and kind of, I think there's some societal expectations of women, like both like there is space to be vulnerable and to experience emotion, I think, which I think is hugely beneficial, but then also this, I think sometimes expectation that women are supposed to do it all and do it all with a smile and do it all like kind of effortlessly, and I think sometimes the model that particularly like women who, you know, maybe identifying more as like professional women or like working moms or things like that, I think there's this this narrative that like a successful strong woman is like going out and making money and kicking butt at their job, and then coming home and like taking care of their family and being emotionally accessible to their family, and kind of like helping like manage things at home, and doing it all like without complaining.
Right.
And
All while keeping it all together. And
yeah, absolutely. And so I think like part of my relationship to that like has been, you know, thinking about like what, you know, I want my like my partnership with my fiance to be, and like what it looks like to be giving mutual support, like within a relationship, and what it looks like to like not do things perfectly all the time, and to not beat yourself up about it like for not being perfect. And I think I'm lucky that I've been able to spend a lot of time like forming really strong relationships, particularly with like other women in my life that I've stayed really connected to, and I think they all do a really good job of like modeling that vulnerability of like checking in, of like, you know, like I'm going through this hard thing, and but like being able to own like struggles that they've had around that, that I think had, you know, then make it easier to like not expect, you know, like that kind of like level of perfection from like oneself, which is, you know, nice. And I feel really lucky to have that.
I have just a very distinct impression that I feel like you embody all these different qualities really, really well. Like in terms of just integrating a whole range of qualities, you know, and ones that might be typically or stereotypically construed as female or feminine, I mean, or not. And it's interesting. I still get sort of clumsy, I feel like, you know, trying to talk about this in some ways, but yeah, I think that comes through without, in my experience of you, without even you like having to talk about it explicitly in terms of gender issues.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
What do you think about how you've come to embody what you're talking about?
That's a good question. I mean, I think part of it is I guess like some modeling and like seeing it in other people. I think part of it is like starting to like feel, I think, more confident. Like I think like a lot of women and a lot of folks, I think I definitely have struggled in the past with kind of like imposter syndrome type things. And I think I'm settling into this place of both like feeling comfortable in what I have to offer, but I think also having some humility and knowing that I'm not an expert. And so I like to think that I like bring that to spaces that I'm in, of like I'm really anxious to learn from people, but also feel really confident in what I'm bringing to the table.
Yeah.
That I definitely didn't like have as much, I think, earlier in my career. I think I was told by some lovely mentors that they thought that I had that. And I wish that that was the case. And I think maybe I did in some ways have that, maybe sometimes, of like a hubris that comes with not having a lot of work and life experience. So you think that you know more than you do. And I think, once I, kind of like realized that there, were certainly things that I hadn't, experienced or necessarily felt like I had expertise in. That's when I think the kind of imposter syndrome set in. I'm kind of coming out on the other side of that. So I think that's part of it. And it, and I don't know, just in general, I think that I think in almost somewhat like of opposition to what I grew up with is I really like and like thrive off of like having vulnerable conversations with people,
Yeah.
and like being able to like dive deep. And maybe that's because it's something like I, sometimes like hoped for more. And sometimes that I still can, talk openly with family now, but that it's almost like, yeah, like making up for things I felt like I was missing out on. So yeah, I like to go deep
Yeah.
fast in conversations, which is not everybody's jam, and that's okay.
Well, I think that's a great example of like, I think about that too often, like the reparenting process, reparenting ourselves in ways that, that, I don't know, I give a lot of credit to my parents, and, I don't think it was, with any intention of neglecting this or that kind of need. And it was part of the culture, part of the times they were in, part of the needs they were trying to address in other ways. Yeah. I think it's certainly complicated, and I don't even have a point to that, but
Yeah. But no, and I think it is sometimes, it is hard, right? Like I think you almost feel like you're doing, or I almost feel like I'm doing my family a disservice by like reflecting on some of these things. But I think it is realizing like that, just to your point, that it's not of any like any like ill intention or any like lack of ability or
right.
on their part, but of more just like what they learned, what they were exposed to, and and it's I think hard to break out of being taught a very specific and modeled a very specific way of being.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to highlight that I really like what I'm hearing from you is sort of finding yourself through both confidence, like you said, like confidence with what you have to offer as a person, and humility, like both of those things. Humility for, I don't know, all the things we don't know or don't quite yet understand. Yeah, I think that's oftentimes what I resonate with people who are both those things.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I think so too. And those are, I think, definitely mirror like qualities that, people that I'm close to. Some maybe less humble than others, but
They're working on it, maybe.
yeah.
My next question has to do, so this project I'm calling Elephant in the Room. It's one of the ways I think we talk about a lot of things in mental health when I'm sitting and doing counseling with folks is, there's just, and in, yeah, still in some surprising ways that even things as basic as just like emotions, like there's still so much that we don't talk about with it, like we're talking about. Are there any other kinds of, so-called elephants in the room that come to mind for you that feel salient for you, your life, the world we live in today, that feel worth like bringing some attention to?
Yeah, I feel like there's so many. I mean, I think kind of moving from like smaller to larger scale stuff. I think on the one hand, sometimes it feels like kind of globally or at least like nationally, we've kind of lost an awareness for what the kind of in the impact of the pandemic is. I think when things were kind of initially happening in the spring, it felt like there was sort of some conversation about, um, how these aren't normal circumstances, and I think validating how people might be feeling about that,
Yeah,
and sort of encouraging kind of kindness and patience with ourselves. And I don't know that I hear as many of those conversations happening now. And so I worry sometimes that all of us collectively are now feeling like we need to hold ourselves to a standard of what our performance was like pre-pandemic, because I think there's almost this feeling that we're in this new normal. So like we should be functioning as though everything is fine, and it's not fine. And the pandemic is only like a piece of, the stressors and the injustices and the tensions that are happening right now that I think, can make it really hard to be fully present and to be kind of like bringing our best selves to the table all the time. So it's something I think about a lot. And even like timing wise too, is I just think moving into this, holiday season too, of sort of this like unspoken um, difference of how holidays might show up for people, and whether holidays might really exacerbate feelings that someone's having around a loss, and just like really feeling the absence of a loved one around the holidays, or like just having a different relationship with your family, and talking about spending time with people during the holidays maybe not feeling the same for some people as it is others. And then even more on top of that now, like for a lot of folks, it might not be safe to be spending time with family, during the holidays, just due, to the virus and trying to
yeah,
maintain distance. And so I'm trying to think about how I'm approaching conversations about the
hmm
holidays and moving into that season with other folks, and not making assumptions about
hmm
how they're feeling about that. And of course, also not making assumptions about what holidays people celebrate to begin with. And that's something we don't provide a lot of space for. Um,
yeah,
and then I think, on, like bigger scales, I think there's a lot of things that we don't always have a lot of awareness to, just when it comes to, identity, and like particularly around like oppression and privilege. And I think, as myself, as someone who holds privilege in a lot of identity areas, like I try the best that I can to like be thinking about, again, like assumptions that I might be making about different folks' experiences that could be like very, very different, from my experiences, or how I'm able to exist in the world, particularly as a white person, and as a cisgender person, and as, someone who identifies as mostly straight. And so I think, that's something that I know we're having increasing conversation about, but I think to be like really mindful, of, again, like kind of like those assumptions that we're bringing to the table, that everyone's kind of coming at something the same way that we are. And I think that can show up with class as well on campus, and it's something I try to be really careful about, especially as like we're approaching breaks and things like that, of recognizing that there are a lot of students, and this was my experience when I was at Bowdoin, um,
yeah,
of needing to work during breaks,
yeah,
and that
right,
not being like a vacation or rest, time, or time to engage in volunteer opportunities, or things like that. And I think often when we lead with, where did you go, which I recognize looks different now, but or like what fun things did you do during time off.
yeah,
So yeah, I think there's just unfortunately, just like a lot of things, I think, because we're just sitting in our own lived experience so much. I think sometimes that gets in the way of really giving space for other people to like be honest with us about their experiences, and to feel like truly like included and seen when we're talking about like our anticipations for things, or our feelings about things.
So great. I'm only shaking my head because there's like so many things I want to ask you about. That's all of that.
Yeah.
Um, but thank you for saying all that. I feel like it again. It embodies the humility that you were mentioning before, of just like the how important it is to not make assumptions, particularly about the kind of stressors or pressures that people are under for all kinds of reasons, including, like you're mentioning, like class and money issues, or family, or health, or all kinds of demands on people. And we really have no idea sometimes, maybe a lot of the time, what people are actually going through. So I don't take that lightly when you bring that up. And I think, again, I see you being able to do this, just like what you were talking about, making space and not making assumptions. I'm just curious if I can, where we don't have a ton of time, but I do want to ask you, because uh, what comes up in my mind too as people are listening to this, because I think I can feel you having a genuine like um, process of like understanding these things about yourself. It really comes through, um, about your different identities and sources of privilege. How did you? You probably can't sum that up, right?
Yeah.
Like but maybe you can.
Yeah.
How did you get there? Or like, what was the incentive to get to that place for yourself of knowing yourself this way, and then in turn, like relating to people based on that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess like it's been a few different things. I mean, I think um like part of, I mean, at its most basic, like part of my work around supporting people who have experienced violence is like thinking about this empowerment model, and which leads with kind of not making assumptions and letting people lead with what they want and what they need, um, which I think that has been helpful. In like an kind of academic way, my degree in public health is actually focused in social determinants of health.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent 2 years studying all of the ways in which racism and sexism and homophobia and ableism and religious persecution and all of these levels of oppression have like very real direct and indirect effects on our health, and like our ability to make choices, the choices that are available to us, kind of all of those things. So I think that also was a really like eye-opening experience, to just thinking about like the very like different lived experiences of people who have different identities from me. And then I think I've been lucky to like work with and have relationships with folks who are also very different from me, and like I try to bring that humility to my friendships. And so um, people have been able to, I think, share things like when I have said or done something that kind of
Mm-hmm.
like wasn't recognizing someone's experience, even something little. I can remember having a conversation um, with a supervisor that I had, who was a Black woman, and we were talking about kind of like wearing makeup and these sort of like things like that. And I was like, I
Yeah.
feel like, as like a, someone who like thinks about like feminism this particular way, that like that's not something I feel like I like have to do. Sometimes I do it for fun, but and her feeling safe to say, for her as a Black woman being perceived as a professional, like she felt like that like wearing lipstick and appearing this particular way like influenced how people perceived her, and was something that she had to do,
Right.
and kind of didn't have the ability to opt in or out as like I did as a white woman, and was able, I think also to say in a way that I could hear and has really resonated. Um, and I've had similar conversations with folks that I've been connected with, and so I think when you have enough of those, realizing there's just a lot that we just don't know about other people's experiences. So I think those have been like some of the things that have have been helpful.
Yeah.
And that like that I try to bring that energy, and also realizing that, still there's a lot that I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's so much there we could continue to keep unpacking. So maybe if I have any opportunity, I'll bring you back for a follow-up conversation.
Absolutely happy to do.
But for now, maybe to end on, Lisa, is there any kind of messages that you feel like students might want or need to hear right now, living in the times we're in? And I just kind of keep that broad, like however you want to define what the times are that we're in. But yeah, messages that you'd like to share from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I just think in general, I think this is just, I think in terms of like messages for people to think about navigating this time, I think is to be like gentle with yourself and be gentle with other people right now. That I think this is so much to navigate. There's sort of these are huge intersections of like big public health crises around the pandemic and around racial injustice, the stressors, as we're approaching this election cycle and these, big political changes potentially, and having, I think, some patience with ourselves that like that's going to have like I think an impact on everyone in different ways, and navigating how you're feeling about that. And I think, and as I try to have conversations with people one-on-one about this too, is I think the more that we don't allow ourselves like the space to feel those feelings, then it's like you're feeling like shame or guilt compounded with the feeling, which is just not a very fun place to be in, and really I think can exacerbate like people's emotional states. And then having like that space and grace for other folks too. And I think especially as we're thinking about having conversations with folks across difference and who might have different views than we do, and just trying to find like some shared humanity there, and to not be like giving in to some of I think the divisiveness that's popping up, that's all again just kind of getting in the way with like connecting with other people, and forming community, and yeah, and yeah, I don't know if I have another, but like I think that those are some of the biggest things that I think are important to think about right now.
Thank you for that. Lisa, would you share any examples come to mind for you of ways that you are able to be gentle with yourself? Oh, I might have lost you. Are you still there, Lisa?
Sorry, I got kicked out, I think.
No, it's no problem. And Janie can edit this, so
Okay.
there won't be any lag. And we'll just wrap up real quick because I know we're coming on the hour. So I was just in the middle of asking you if anything does come to mind. Any examples you want to share of how you've been able to be gentle with yourself and people in your life, Lisa?
Oh yeah, that is a good question.
You're like, I don't.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing, well, it's kind of fun. I mean, this, and I guess this is a very vulnerable story, but one thing I've been trying to do is try to like when I'm having kind of a bad day or like feeling a little overwhelmed, to do a little like self-nurturing, which has often been like a tea and a baked good late in the day. And the other day I realized I was having a harder day than I thought I was, because I got home and realized the cookie that they gave me was not the cookie that I ordered. Into tears. Because I really, really wanted
like,
the sugar cookie.
gentle to others.
This sugar cookie, this like layer of frosting on top, and I was like so excited about it. I was like, this is what I need.
No.
And I'm just gonna like have this moment with myself, and then I didn't get to have that. And then I was like, oh, apparently I really needed this. And that was another moment of like being gentle to myself, that like, yes, this is not, a standard emotional reaction to getting the wrong order, and like that's okay. And that kind of indicates that like, maybe I need to be like checking back in with like, am I getting enough sleep, and doing all those things to take care of myself. I think that's something I've been thinking about. And I think every time I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And then I think anytime I'm, I've been trying to have conversations with people about like, how are you doing? And then be like, no, really, like, how are you doing? Not just the like, I'm fine, everything's fine kind of conversation. And, being present for them, and then, being honest with how I'm feeling too. And not, like feeling like any sort of way about that.
Yeah. Well, as always, I really appreciate your capacity to go deep, Lisa, and have deeper conversation. That's my usual experience of you. So thank you for having that for other people, and for other people to listen. And I really appreciate everything you had to offer today. So thank you again for doing this. And maybe we can do it again sometime. And I do want to encourage folks to reach out to Lisa. What is the best way for people typically to get a hold of you these days?
Yeah, I mean, people can always find me on email, lpeters@bowdoin.edu. And I do have like a Microsoft Office like booking site that people can use that to like directly make an appointment. And then I try to sit outside, although it's getting kind of cold, on campus on Thursday afternoons. But I'm always happy to meet people in person if that's an option for people, or if that's of their comfort level, and then can meet with people remotely, really easily too. And I'm fine doing voice calls if people, are getting a little fatigued with having their face too. But I think starting with email is usually the best way. And my office is in Dudley Co. So folks know.
That's great. I super encourage people to reach out to Lisa. She's wonderful to talk to, easy to talk to, as you can probably tell. And just appreciate all that you do. And thank you for taking the time again.
Yeah, thank you again. Thanks for doing this for campus. It's a great resource, I think.
Happy to. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.